For those of you that are here for first time, welcome to the 25th Ohio Pawpaw Festival. My name is Rob Brannon. I'm a food scientist, a pawpaw scientist at Ohio University. Says so here, says so there, says so over there, in case you want documentation. And so we have a big schedule of pawpaw presentations today. This is the second, where Jim's going to talk about Rootsuckers in the orchard. Then at 1:15 we have Justin Husher who's going to come and talk. He's a city farmer, so if you want to plant pawpaws on quarter acre with zoning, that kind of stuff. And then at 4:15 Valerie's going to wrap up the day with A to Z presentation on pawpaws and pawpaws. In between we have the best pawpaw contest at noon. Best and biggest pawpaw contest at noon. We'll be announcing the winners at 2 p.m. And then at 2:15 we have a cooking demonstration. Chef Dave Rudy will be doing a cooking demonstration. First 50 people can try samples, so get here for that. And then at 3:30 we have the Brewers Roundtable. So 9, I don't know if I can make 9 holding microphone, 9 beers. You'll get a 4-ounce taster, and so for $30 you get to try 9 beers and listen to the brewers describe putting pawpaw in beer and all that good stuff. It's a great event. Without further ado, James Dingus is here representing the Ohio Pawpaw Growers Association. If you look to my left, to your right, that booth right there is the Ohio Pawpaw Growers Association. I believe they're the only ones selling pawpaw at the festival right now, because it's a down year. But besides that, they are a font of knowledge. I made this last time, you'll probably hear me say it about 10 times today. There is more concentrated knowledge about pawpaw under that tent right here than anywhere in the world on September 16, 2023. Right? These guys know everything there is to know about pawpaw, and if they don't know, they're probably gonna lie. With that, you ready to go, mister? Take it away.
Well, hey there. Welcome to the 25th anniversary of the Pawpaw Festival. If it was your wedding anniversary, it'd be your silver anniversary. Today what I want to talk to you about is rootsuckers. It's a subject that a lot of people haven't covered over the years that I've been dealing with pawpaws. You don't hear a whole lot about rootsuckers. I have a lot of rootsuckers available to me. By the way, you can call me Jim. I'm from Richland County, located halfway in between Columbus and Cleveland, a little area called Perrysville, and it's hilly country. It kind of puts you in mind of where my dad grew up. During the introductions, one of the things we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about what is a rootsucker, and then we'll talk about colonies, and then harvesting rootsuckers, grafting rootsuckers, and then I'll get into showing you some grafted trees that I did on my property. When I get to that point, we'll go through them quickly so we can get down to why so fast. And then I have one particular graft that I wanted to show you that I'm kind of proud of. So without further ado, here we go. What is a rootsucker? A rootsucker is nothing more than a root shoot coming from the main tree itself. The rootsucker grows from the lateral root of that tree, and it can extend for a long distance. The tree begins to grow outward, a little tiny node on that root will form, and up will pop a little tree, and it'll look just like a regular tree. And that's how they form. How far will they expand? Well, that's kind of hard to say. As each rootsucker develops its own root, because it will try to develop its own root system because the leaf is demanding that energy, and it's going to continue to grow outward. I've got some rootsuckers there at my place that are 15 to 20 feet away from the parent tree. Colony. How many folks out there has been out hiking around, you come upon a whole bunch of pawpaw trees, and you found them in the spring because you were able to learn how to identify the flowers, and then come harvest time you come back when they should be fruit and you see no fruit. That happens. A few of you out there have come across that. More than likely what's happened is you came across a what is called a colony. A colony is nothing more than a whole bunch of root suckers growing around one tree. Or maybe there was a tree at one time that took damage from a deer rub. It rotted itself out and broke out, and that root system is still down below the ground. And what that root system is doing is pushing. That tree wants to survive. And you can walk up on these quite a bit whenever you're trying to forage for fruit. But however, you end up coming onto another patch someplace else, and there's fruit everywhere. Well, there could be more than one colony involved. What ends up happening is as the previous speaker had said, a lot of your pawpaw cultivars out there are unable to self-pollinate. He explained a little bit about the flower. The flower begins to develop. It comes out as a female, and as that flower ages, it becomes a male flower. But there's other flowers that are still developing, and it's not able to self-pollinate it. So you need another non-related plant in the area. Now, sometimes you'll run into an area and there'll be a big pawpaw patch, and man, it's got fruit all over the place. And what you may have ran into is more than one colony. The colonies growing into one another, they're there. And because of that, the colonies have the ability to pollinate one another. Me, myself, when I run into a number of colonies that are intermingled with one another, I will call that a community. Communities work together, pretty much like what we're all doing. We're all here together, we're all learning together, and to me, that's communities working together. Harvesting root suckers. Some of you folks out there that know who I am and you follow me, one of the things that you know is I'm a big advocate for that root sucker. I harvest a lot of root suckers on my property, and I've been doing it for several years, and I've utilized those root suckers for my benefit. Now, one of the things that I do is I locate the root sucker in line with the parent tree. And in between that parent tree and the root sucker, if you remember what I had said earlier, they're growing from the lateral root of that tree. What I will do is I will come probably 6 inches from that root sucker going towards that tree, and I'll chunk down into the ground there, because your lateral root is generally roughly around 6 inches, 8 inches, depending on the environment that it's in. And I'll chunk down in there and I will sever what I call the umbilical cord. That's the cord, that's that root that's feeding that root sucker, causing it to come up out of the ground. Well, then I'll leave it there. And actually, to tell you the truth, the best time to do that is in the fall. If you can get out there and do that in the fall, go back in the spring, and you can be able to dig that root sucker up. However, don't treat it like a bare root. When you dig that root sucker up, you want to leave as much dirt around it as possible. And there's reasons for that to help that tree to develop. You don't want to dig it up and just have a bare root sticking out there that you're going to try and transplant, because chances are it may not live. Now, with the root sucker, with the way I've been harvesting root suckers, when I first started getting into this, I was told, and I have heard many times from a lot of people, that only about 10% of the root suckers will survive. They're hard to get to live. But what if I was to tell you I'm setting on 90+% success rate? And there's reasons behind that. The root sucker itself is feeding not just from what's above, like the sun, the rain, but it's feeding below the ground. And I'll try to explain that later. But whenever I try to dig that root sucker up, what I will do is I'll have a piece of burlap laying right there, and I'll get as much root ball as I possibly can, and I'll stick it in there, tie it shut, find the location where I want to transplant it. If the root sucker was in the full sun to start with, I'll plant it in full sun and not worry about it. And then I'll plant it right there in that next hole. I'll untie the burlap, I'll shove the burlap down into the ground, and then I'll go ahead and fill it in. That little tiny piece of burlap ain't going to break my pocket. Not to mention it could help in aiding and retaining moisture for that root sucker to survive. And maybe a little bit of food source. If the root sucker was in the woods and I dug it up, doing the same method, once I plant that tree, I'm going to protect that tree from the sun. I'll erect a little fence around it. I'll put burlap or a shade cloth around that fence to shield it from the sun. Now, it's the ultraviolet rays in that sun that'll kill that tree. It has not been exposed to it. It can handle the light, such as in a greenhouse. It's able to deal with it. It's blocking the ultraviolet rays. And that's what will burn that little tree up if you don't protect that tree. And what I'm going to end up doing here is I'm going to go through here. I'm going to try and make this quick because we had to be a little bit short on time. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you some pictures here after a bit. And the pictures that I'm going to show you is going to be grafted root suckers. I have a small orchard on my property, and I'd say, well, I counted them up probably about 2 weeks ago. 50% of my orchard were root suckers at one time. Once you dig that little tree up, that root sucker up, it is no longer a root sucker in my book, it's an individual tree. Okay? And, by the way, it will grow its own taproot in time. That will happen. I'm out of place as far as where my pictures are, but we'll see. This is the first year development of the root sucker, the seed. The one on your left is the root sucker. The one on the right is the seedling. Now the seedling's taproot, as you can see, is not that long, and that's because I work with pruning taproots whenever I'm growing them through air pruning, or I may just take them out of the pot and snip them. And the reason why I do that is because I'm trying to generate root mass. I want that root mass. And on this next picture, what I'm going to show you is that is the second year development of a root sucker versus the second year development of the seedling. And as you can see, that root sucker in its second year developed a lot of root mass. You can see to the right of it where the cut took place from the parent tree. And what ends up happening is given the proper care and following what it is that I just told you about, leaving as much dirt around that root sucker as possible, it'll grow its own root mass. And that's the reason why I call it an individual. It's no longer a root sucker. It's an individual tree. It's an exact copy of the rootstock that you got the root sucker from. Now some folks will ask, well, I've got a grafted tree, and if the grafted tree dies and shoots up a root sucker, is it going to be? No, it's not. It's not going to be what your grafted tree is. It's not going to be your cultivar. It's going to end up being whatever that rootstock was. Rootstock itself could have been grown from a seed. It could have been Another known cultivar, it could have been what they call seed select, a quality seed. You decide to allow that to grow, you may end up having a good fruit. However, if you have a grafted tree and that grafted tree doesn't die and it produces a root sucker, what you end up having is your rootstock growing along with your graft. My practice is I don't want anything from the rootstock growing on a grafted tree, because anything growing from the rootstock could overcome that cultivar. It's just not worth it for me to even try that. For the most parts, when I have grafted cultivars, little root sucker comes up, I'm going to snip it off down to the ground. And no, I'm not going to use herbicides. Anytime you use herbicides on them root suckers to get rid of them, you're poisoning that tree. Why? Because that root sucker is attached to the root system of the parent tree. So kind of do yourself a favor and steer away from herbicides on these trees. You don't want to poison your trees. And it will poison your trees over a period of time. I've heard of some bad results of people conducting themselves in that practice. Now, something I am going to share with you about this, all right? The trees that I showed you just now, 3 of them were in pots. 1 of them was not. Got carried away. The seedling on the right, I put it in a pot just as soon as I got done taking that picture. I treated it with something that I'll share with you later on and potted it up. It survived. However, that root sucker did not survive. I dug that root sucker up on purpose. I brought it out, I laid it there to take that picture, and yes, I did plant that root sucker, and it did not survive. And the reason being is when I dug that root sucker up, I disrupted something under the ground that helped in destroying that root sucker, which I'll share later. That's a bare root. That's not good. Now back to this picture. Both of those trees survived. They both survived that transplant. As soon as I took care of that picture right there, I went ahead and I transplanted them into pots. I treated them with what it is I treat my seedlings and suckers with, and planted it in a pot. The root mass is one of the things. Both of those trees survived. And you know, there's something else I'd like for you to really look at close on this picture. You see at the top of the root sucker, there's parafilm up there, and that root sucker was a grafted tree. I grafted that root sucker this year. So we got more than one stress factor going on. We have a bare root tree, and we also have a grafted tree. That was a grafted root sucker, and which, by the way, is still alive today. That's an SAA overlease. So it survived that transplant. And a lot of that's got to do with what you see below it, all that root mass. That root mass is what helped that tree to survive. Grafted root suckers. In 2019, I decided to plant out my own little personal orchard. And as I said, 50% of those trees were root suckers at one time. This was done in 2019. I planted them there, I protected them, and then the following year I went ahead and grafted those trees, converted them over to a known cultivar. 2019 root sucker, grafted in May of 2020. That one there is an NC1. This year I went out there, that picture, by the way, was probably taken about the middle of July. Maybe the beginning of August, after the graft took place. This year, I went out there and I took a series of pictures because we had talked about this presentation and I wanted to show something to you. That's the same tree as of June of this year. It took it 3 years to get to that point from the graft. Incidentally, that tree is big enough to carry fruit, but that bad freeze that the previous gentleman had just talked about really put a hurt. Had a total of somewhere around 6 to 7 trees that should have been able to produce fruit this year. And out of all those trees, I have 1 cluster, and that's it. Well, at least I'll get to taste a little bit of something anyways. Once again, another root sucker that had been grafted in 2020. I dug it up in 2019, also an NC1. And the same tree this year, an NC1. And what I'm going to do is, like I said, I'm going to try and go through this part quick because we got some good ground to cover. That one there is another one. It's a sunflower grafted in May. And that too was a root sucker. The same tree in June. Now something you're going to notice, and back here on the upper left hand corner of the picture you see a tree right there. It's leafed out. That tree got grafted. I top worked that tree, and that's the reason why in the next picture you see all the stems on it. The leaves are no longer there, and that's because I grafted that tree. I top worked it and tried to convert that tree over to a Potomac with a number of grafts. I stuck 9 grafts into that tree, and all of them were just Potomac. This one here is one that is a root sucker that I had grafted last year in May of 2020. It's a Davis. I went with Davis because of NC1. From my understanding, NC1's a cross between Davis and Overlease. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and graft a Davis. I've already got an Overlease. And I wanted to take a look at what are the characteristics between the two that cause the characteristics of the Overlease. I look at things very closely like that. And by the way, that tree is doing very well. The graft that I did on that was a graft that I showed down at the Pawpaw conference. I call an inlay graft. And it's not completely healed in this picture, but that tree right now, it completely scabbed over. You can't see that little knock on the side of it. Now this one right here is a tree that I'm going to show you that I find to be very surprising. That tree right there was a root sucker that I dug up in 2018, transplanted it in the spot that it's in right now, and I left it alone in 2019, which by the way, I didn't start grafting pawpaws or any trees until 2020. So I'm pretty new to grafting, as I'm sure there's probably a handful of folks here the same way. But anyways, I came to that tree in 2020 and I decided to graft that tree. And I kept an eye on that tree and took pictures as time went on. So the graft took place in 2020. That's the same tree. I took that picture in August of 2020. And it's a mango. Now, don't be confused, we're not talking mango fruit. We're talking about a cultivar known as mango, which was located in northern Georgia. It's actually, at one time, a wild pawpaw that somebody found, hey, this is pretty good stuff. And they decided to go ahead and propagate it. A lot of the cultivars that you come across at one time were trees that were discovered in different areas of the country. Overlease, Tatu, Taylor. There's a number of them. I believe sunflower's also another. They were just quality wild pawpaws that somebody decided to cultivate. So we have grafting going on, and this is where the cultivars are coming from. Now we have cultivars that we're actually to the point of breeding, force breeding cultivars with one another to develop better fruit, such as Susquehanna, Shenandoah, NC1, IXL. There's a number of them out there. But anyways, that picture was taken in August of 2020. The same tree, the picture was taken in 2021. Pretty little bushy tree, if I think so, in my opinion. It turned out to be a nice looking tree. That same tree I went and visited last year in August of 2022. Well, it's a good looking tree. It really don't look all that big. It's very well bushed out. Beautiful looking tree. Well, the same day that I took that tree, I took another picture just to give you a perspective of just how big that tree really is. It looks a lot bigger with somebody standing beside it, does it not? That was a rootsucker, okay? And that, like I said, that's a mango, and that's one of the trees I'm pretty much proud of. Why so fast? Seedlings versus rootsuckers. Over here to my right, you see two bags. The two white bags, those are grafted rootsuckers. I dug those up last year. I took care of those trees inside those bags. I dug up a total of 31 rootsuckers, and out of the 31 rootsuckers, 3 of them did not survive. So I had 28 to survive. I think that's pushing roughly a little over 90%. And all those 28 I grafted, and one graft did not take. And I thought, okay, I just lost one. But later on this year, I went back and revisited the tree, and the tallest one on the right is that tree. So I brought that 28 back. The tree survived, just the graft didn't take. Which, by the way, that was grafted June 28th, I'm pretty sure. Pretty late for a graft. Right here, you're looking at Acacia Atwood I bought here last year from the Pawpaw Festival. It was grafted June 19th, 2022. That was a seedling. And you see I have a yardstick fastened to the fence, and we're just barely at 2 foot tall. Now the next tree is a Prima 1216. I grafted that tree in May 14th of 2022. Now, granted, we're talking 2 different cultivars. You're probably going to get different growth rate and all that. And there's some things that I plan on doing next year as far as taking a look at growth rate of cultivars, the vigorousness of it. And guess what? I'm going to utilize that rootsucker to help me figure that out. On what is growing quickly, what is able to grow quickly. Kentucky Champion. That one there was a rootsucker that I had dug up in 2021 and transplanted where it's at. And I grafted that on the same date that I grafted the Prima 1216 in 2022. And you can see, according to the yardstick, it's pushing 44 inches tall. That rootsucker, by the way, came up out of the ground in 2021. That's when it first came up out of the ground and looked at me and said, "Hello, Jim, come get me." Okay, I'm here, you know. Sorry. But anyways, that picture was taken in June. Right now, that tree is taller than the yardstick. And it's already, as far as height, it's gotten tall. We had a bad windstorm. It was laying on the ground. I thought, holy cow, I broke my tree out. No, it didn't. The root bent. And I brought it back up and staked it up, and that tree is still doing fine. Now, why so fast? What is it that makes that rootsucker grow quicker than a seedling. Well, this is where I've just been hinting around to you about something, and Ted said something at the first presentation about fungus. Well, there's something going on under the ground, and below the surface of the ground there's a little organism down there called mycorrhizal. Me, myself, I like to call it the primordial soup of life. The mycorrhizals are already attached to that tree because of the parent tree. Now with a seedling, what do you get? It's the old adage. First year sleep, second year creep, third year leap. I'm sure some of you have heard that in the past. What's happening is that seedling, as it's growing and depending on itself to grow. And then in that second year, it's going through that sleep mode, but the root system is still pushing and looking. And in that third year, what ends up happening is the root system has gotten itself to a side where it has came across what I called a little bit ago the primordial soup of life, mycorrhizals. And that's when it begins to really flourish and take off. Well, what's happening with the root sucker? The parent tree is normally going to be much, much more mature, and it's already got mycorrhizals attached to the root system. Now, whenever you dig that tree up, that root sucker, when you go to try to dig that root sucker up and you leave that dirt ball attached, what's happening is once you break that root sucker out of the ground, the outer edge of that root ball, you've killed the mycorrhizals because it's been hit by air, and it'll actually kill it. But what's within that root ball up against that root system is still there. Air hasn't hit it yet, and that's the reason why I said leave a root ball. And that's the reason, incidentally, why the one root sucker I showed you earlier died. The mycorrhizals that were attached to it died. So there wasn't nothing there to help that tree to flourish. And that's what that mycorrhizal does for that tree. Well, what happens is when that tree begins to try to grow, the little root ball, the dirt that you left around that root system is still feeding that tree because the mycorrhizals are helping it. And what happens is that root system tries to push out of that root ball. As it does, what is it doing? It's dragging the mycorrhizals along with it. And when it makes it outside that, it starts accumulating the nutrients. They work hand in hand. That's the good fungi that Ted was talking about. They work hand in hand. This one right here was a grafted tree. It's not grafted in this picture. It was a root sucker at one time. There was an elderly gentleman that lived down the road from me. He had a couple of trees. He dug up 3 of them. He took 2 from one tree and 1 from another tree, and he said, hey, you got to get them from different trees. You won't get no fruit if you don't. So I planted that tree roughly in 2008, and somewhere along the way, the wife helped me trying to keep things cleaned up and everything, and it accidentally got cut down. I thought, well, it's over with. It shot back up from the root system. It grew another one. On social media, on one of the Facebook pages, somebody had asked a question about digging up a larger tree. Well, I had the availability to me, and that one right there was about a 6.5 foot tree. As you can see, I dug a trench around it. My driveway's right here. I got a berm, and what I did, I took a shovel, trench shovel. I dug a trench around that thing, and then I dug a trough over to it from the driveway, and went over there, wrapped it up in chicken wire, bound it all tight so that root ball wouldn't fall apart, and I used my tractor, went up underneath it and picked it up. And yes, that taproot got severed. The hole that the root ball that you're looking at is about 33 inches wide and about 2.5 foot deep. And you can see a lot of the root follicles around that tree that I tried to save around that tree. And then I went ahead and I transplanted that tree in its resting place in 2018 in the fall. And then I went back in the spring and it woke up, spring of 2019. Now in 2020 I went to that tree and I decided I'm going to do some grafting. So I went ahead, I started grafting into all the limbs that you see right there, and every graft that I stuck into every limb was from sunflower, a sunflower graft. And then in some of the grafts didn't take, so what did I do? 2021, I went back and I visited that tree and I grafted onto 2 limbs. And I did the inlay graft on both limbs to try to bring balance back into that tree. And then that's what the tree looked like as of June of this year. Sunflower. I went back a couple weeks later and decided to do another picture of it, and just to show you how big that tree is, and it's even bigger now. I'm standing roughly about 5 foot between from the tree towards the camera. So I'm about 5 foot away from that tree. And yes, you see the little white paint down the bottom. I noticed that in some of the pictures that Ted had shared. That white paint's there, yep, protected from the sun. Also to protect it from unwanted insects. And also, that'll also help to protect it from deer rubbing on it, and it's because that white is not natural. But I still don't trust it. I just recently put a tree guard around that tree to protect it from rubbing deer. The thing about deer rubbing on the pawpaws is the smell, the softness of the wood, and the give of the tree. It's a soft wood. That deer is working out neck muscles, and that's the reason why they like to hit them pawpaws and rub into them. Rootsuckers for the orchard. We've come full circle to where it was that we began. On the right, the tree on the right, all 4 trees at one time were rootsuckers, and they were placed in those bags last year. Those trees were grafted during the months of March and April. 1 tree per day just to see if it would work. Once I got that first one to take, okay, let's move on to the second one. I waited for each one of them to take. The one on the right is a Lehman's Benny's favorite, which I have another one right there is a Benny's favorite, Jerry Lehman's variety. That's a different tree. It's a different rootsucker. Well, not a rootsucker once again, individual. The one after that is a Jerry's Big Girl. That too is a Lehman. The one after that is an IXL. I decided to graft IXL because I did a little bit of reading and I come to find out that IXL is pretty much the same cross as an NC1, but inverted. NC1 is overleased to a Davis, IXL, a Davis to an overleased. How true that is, I don't know, but that's what I've read and that's what I've looked into, and I thought, you know what, I want to see if I can get that to grow, because I love the NC1. When you walk into an orchard, you could tell an NC1 compared to the rest of them. They stand out. They're a beautiful tree. And the one next to it is a Wabash, the very far right, Neil Peterson variety. I decided to graft Wabash because I was told that Wabash was one of the varieties that was hard to get to take a graft. So I decided to step up to the challenge and see if that was a fact. And I've got a number of Wabashes now. All those trees right there have been integrated into my orchard. And I have to say I was very, very pleased when I was able to take them out of the bags, especially on the root system. I have my own orchard. It's in its infancy. I just started it. I just recently got my nursery license. I'm still trying to build it up. Here in a couple years, I've had a few people that have been down to my place. They came down. I walked them through the property, let them see what I got going on. And yes, I have sold some trees out of there, very, very little. But it was just a little bit of pocket change for me, and it kind of helped out on all the expenses. Good Lord, I didn't know how much I was getting into until I started doing it. Think hard before you do it. Man, I tell you, it can eat away. I'm still arguing with my loan officer. No, I'm just kidding. One of the things that I do say an awful lot on social media, for some of you that are out here, I am on social media quite a bit. I do an awful lot of videos. And one of the things that I'm a firm believer in, learn as I go, share as I learn. This is how we all learn from one another. And it would be nice, and I would love to see other folks get in there and start sharing. Just share as much as you can, because this is how we grow. This is how we learn. We have to learn from one another and try to learn from our own mistakes. I'm going to do some closing credits here to North American Pawpaw Growers Association. They are the reason, the Ohio Pawpaw Growers Association is a chapter. They are the reason why I'm here today. Now, some folks will go over to the booth and they'll ask questions about the PGA, and they ask, what can it do for me? Well, what would you have it do for you? I joined them and I worked with them, and that's the reason why I'm here today. There's key individuals that you can become in contact with that'll help you grow and produce what it is that you want to produce in your walk of life when it comes to what? That pawpaw. There's quite a few other people here I'd like to say thank you to, especially you folks out here. You folks out here are a big support, and I want to thank all of you for coming out here and checking this out. If you want to get a hold of me, I do have a web page, but it's not up and running. All I did was secured that web page so it's secured. Nobody else can take it. One day we're going to get it up and running, and I will be using that web page. And if you want to make contact with me, you can make contact with me through Facebook, social media, Messenger, which I get a lot of contacts from Facebook, and you can contact me through the YouTube channel. Both channels are called Pawpaw Chronicles. The YouTube channel is called Pawpaw Chronicles and More with Jim. Incidentally, people that are admins on that group, 3 of them I met through YouTube. They make a comment, I'll comment back, and the next thing you know, we're corresponding back and forth. And one of them came all the way up from Arkansas, stopped by and saw me for the first time, and he and I have been in contact for 5 years. That was our first meeting, and boy was that a treat. But anyways, I hope that's been informative for you. If anybody has any questions, I'm standing right here and I'll try to answer them best I can. Yes, sir.
So the word you were saying before, something rice gnome, can you tell me how that's spelled? I want to look it up and learn about it a little.
Mycorrhizal. Good question. M-O-C... I'm going to have to look that up. I can't remember exactly. It's a hard word to spell. I'm going to say M-Y-C-O-R-R-H-A-E. That's real close, but I'm not exactly sure. Any other questions?
Is it better to fall or spring to try to transplant full-size plants? I might have missed it at the beginning.
Well, once again, it depends. It depends on how much green you have on the tree. Me, myself, I plant all summer long, but you got to take care of it. You can't just plant it, walk away, and forget about it. And that's the key. Take care of what it is that you're doing whenever you go to plant that tree. Don't walk away from it. Because if you do, you've wasted the labor. You don't want to waste that labor. But it's a larger tree. That one right there that I showed you earlier, I put manure type compost down in the bottom of the hole. I dug the hole itself 3 foot deep and 4 foot in diameter. And I treated all that soil before I transplanted it, and I watered the garp out of it. Any other questions? Yes.
What are your best grafting practices? When do you do it? How do you collect your scion wood? And I'm gathering you like the inlay graft the best, right?
How do you graft? Can you repeat that? Somebody didn't hear you.
What are your best grafting practices? When do you do it? How do you collect your scion wood? And I'm gathering you like the inlay graft the best. Is that correct?
Okay, the best time to pick up your scion wood. I'll try to cover that first. I'll go out and collect my scion wood probably about the 3rd or 4th week of February. I wait for the temperatures to climb a little bit so a little bit of sap starts pushing into the bud. And then I'll collect it, and then I'll turn around and protect it with moisture and stick it in the refrigerator to keep it from drying out. As far as my favorite graft, depends on the circumstances. If I have a graft that's good, you know, a tree that's big enough to take that graft, one I like to use is the whipping tongue.
Okay.
And that's because of cambium layer contact. Now, whenever you're grafting, one of the things that you want to look at and pay attention to is what is going on within that log, the layers of the log. What we see on the outside is just that, the bark, the layers of the log. What's underneath is the phloem. That's what feeds the tree from the leaf down. And then on the other side of that is the cambium layer, and the other side of that is the xylem. And the xylem is nothing more than the wood part. That's what you tap into with oak trees to get maple syrup, you know, to get sap out of. That cambium is what you're looking for. The more contact you can get between the scion wood and the cambium, the better off you are, because you want that good contact. And I found that whipping tongue's a good one. Another good one that somebody I know that uses, Cliff England, is modified bark graft. A lot of cambium contact. Anybody else?
What time of year though do you find the best graft?
I wait until after the last frost. Usually, right, you know, like growing season, when you plant your gardens out and stuff like that, you want to see push on the leaf. Pay attention to the tree. When that leaf gets roughly around 1 inch to 1.5 inches long and it's beginning to grow, that's a good time to grow, because that's the time that sap is pushing out of the ground.
Jim?
Or graft, I said grow. Good time to graft.
Jim? So I know we have a couple more questions, but we've got to turn this space over and get ready for the best pawpaw contest, right? And so that takes a little bit of time. Here's what's going to happen. Jim is going to get his stick and then start walking over towards the North American Pawpaw Growers tent, right? He's going to be like the head of the comet, and you guys are all going to be the tail, okay? Following him over. And those guys, Jim and those guys, will answer your questions for the rest of the day, okay? Best pawpaw contest here at 12:15. City pawpaws at 1:15.